Hey friends, welcome back. So on today's show, we're going to talk about some new data that shows that up to 575,000 hospitalizations here in the US alone could have been prevented. We're going to talk about a new CDC finding looking at over 148,000 individuals that tested confirmed positive for the novel human coronavirus in the emergency room, and the common characteristics with regards to body composition in 78.3% of those infections. And then we're also going to get into some changes in LDL cholesterol levels and reductions in insulin and triglyceride in women that are on a ketogenic diet. And we're going to talk about the importance of that. So first of all, I want to welcome you back. Thanks for being here live. I know a lot of you are kind of sick of hearing about the virus, but I think it's important to sort of revisit some things that seemingly made common sense if you looked at some of the immunopathologic findings that are characteristic of obesity and overweight this time last year that for some reason the media and the CDC glossed over. And I think it's important that we review these things because, of course, there are going to be other infectious agents that will be exposed to humanity in the years to come, and we should remember this. And so this is a good teaching moment. So what you're seeing on the screen here is some of the pathologic changes that are characteristic and common in terms of their immunopathological overlap with obesity and diabetes and this novel human coronavirus. So I just want you to see that image before we actually get into this latest finding that was just published today. And I'll read you the title because I know some of you listen to this as you're driving home and things like that. So the title of this, and this is directly from the CDC's website, which is where I got it. The title is Body Mass Index and Risk for COVID-19 Related Hospitalization, Intensive Care Unit Admission, Invasive Mechanical Ventilation, and Death in the U.S. between March and December of 2020. So over the course of the last year, there was 3.3 million medical records and so forth for hospitalizations, at least that looked at had some of the features, the inclusion criteria for this analysis, looking at body mass index and weight and stuff like that. And of the 148,000 medical records that were that had some sort of body mass index record linked with that, because not everyone has their weight measured, they maybe haven't been to a doctor in 10 years, stuff like that. What these scientists and researchers were able to figure out is 78.3% of all of the hospitalizations occurred in overweight, obese, or morbidly obese individuals. So just think about that. 78.3%. So of these so-called normal weight individuals, which would be people, and this is using body mass index, which is a really crude measurement of height for weight. It's not a very good objective quantification of total body fat because it doesn't really account for muscle mass. But that being said, I mean, these are massive percentages. And again, don't you remember the media always saying an otherwise healthy individual, was hospitalized or almost died or was on a ventilator, and you went and kind of did some digging. We shared some of those videos here on this channel, and that person was definitely not sort of normal weight. Oftentimes were more overweight. So here we have it. Now, I'm not saying this to disparage anyone. I'm not saying this to say, see, I told you so. The reason why we're bringing this up again is to think how we could maybe handle a similar outbreak in the future better. Maybe not close down gyms. Maybe use a more aggregated approach. Maybe start to prevent some of the diseases that are increasing susceptibility to severe outcomes. So encourage people to lose weight. Encourage people to start breathing through their nose. Slow down their breathing, do more belly breathing, start doing sprinting, go to bed earlier, balance circadian rhythms. Maybe don't put up all of these obnoxious streetlights that are augmenting circadian clock physiology and putting fast food restaurants in every corner. Maybe stop subsidizing sugar, corn, canola, and all of that, soy, right? I mean, if we're really going to completely change, launch these new Rebuild America bills, $1 trillion bills due to this virus, why aren't we going to restart from the ground up and really start to change our viewpoint about health? So that's why I'm sharing these things. So if you look at this is an image here of an iceberg. You've seen these images, and so where you see sometimes these images are used to talk about success in business, in life, and underneath the surface you don't really see what's going on. All you see is the person that the actor that made it, or the professional athlete, but it was years of hard work. Or if you look at a disease, obesity or cancer, right? It's years of poor health choices. Now, on the tip of this iceberg is severe COVID-19, hospitalization, intensive care unit, cytokine storm, multi-organ failure, etc. Underneath, you see processed foods, you see exercise deficiency, you see blood sugar imbalances, you see chronic inflammation, you see belly fat, you see frailty, loss of muscle mass is a risk factor. So again, our society is myopically focused on the tip of the iceberg, but seemingly, for whatever reason, forgetting that all of the things underneath the surface of the sea that you can't see are really important. So hopefully you can share this message with the people in your life that you care about, encourage them to start walking every day, to start doing things like even just intermittent fasting or time-restricted feeding, just really basic modalities that can have a sweeping impact on people's blood sugar health and metabolism and all of that. So interesting stuff here. Now, again, what are the new findings from this new analysis? Well, it goes to show that there is a direct correlation between your level of fatness and your risk for mechanical ventilation, for admission to the hospital, and for being in the ICU, and also mortality. So this idea that there's, have you heard about this HAZE movement, health at every size? And it's trying to promote this body positivity and body positive images. You can be healthy at any size, but obviously that's not really the whole story. So we need to be promoting actual being of normal weight, losing body fat, and promoting effective solutions for that. Now, we're going to get into some ways to personalize that throughout this conversation in just a moment, but it goes without saying, compressing your feeding window, going to bed earlier, eating earlier. We've reviewed tons of studies on this. Regular exercise, walking after meals, resistance training. I advise all my clients to hit every major muscle group 1 day per week. So there's a lot of ways to go about this, but I think it's important because, a lot of people, they've completely changed their lives, but they're eating the same old foods. They're still not exercising. They're watching binge watching Netflix until wee hours in the morning. So we got to start talking about this. And in my opinion, the policies of keeping the fast food joints open and the liquor stores open and the stores that sell cigarettes open, but yet closing fitness centers and gyms and yoga studios was just poor policy. And so we got to really start to think differently about the risk-benefit ratio, and realizing that people that don't have a lot of body fat aren't really transmitting the virus as much. Their viral load is a lot lower. Studies have actually shown that. And so this was kind of a meme. The idea of closing gyms was probably a bad policy. So what was interesting is this was from the American Heart Association. Now, I shared this on Instagram, but this is the first time you have heard about it, at least on this particular podcast, was the idea that after looking at hospitalizations for the virus, and again, this is a totally different study from the American Heart Association, they found that if we would have got out in front of this and enacted some of the policies and created incentives like we're talking about now with exercise, with stress reduction, with circadian rhythm optimization, that roughly 575,000 hospitalizations could have been prevented. 575,000, that's a lot, right? Everyone's freaking out about, public masking versus not masking and what states are or aren't and don't have mask mandates. I believe the CDC just rolled out a study to show that, there's like a 1% difference in terms of infectivity and the overall reduction in cases in public masking mandates. Like it's a single digit percentage. Whereas here we have, the data that clearly shows that if we encourage people, incentivize them to lose weight, start eating less processed food, start moving more, start balancing circadian rhythms and microbiomes and all of these things, then guess what? We could have prevented over 500,000 hospitalizations from this one virus alone. So think about that. Now, the study went on to kind of parse out some of the common overlaps here. So what you're seeing is, about 10% of the population has high blood pressure and obesity at the same time. About 5.9% of the entire adult population is obese and has diabetes and has high blood pressure. So you can think about 5% of 330 million people. I mean, you can start to do the math. And if you look here at this, sort of these overlaps where then you have, 2% of the population has hypertension and diabetes at the same time. About 21% of all adults are obese alone, but if you look at the hypertension and obesity, that's more like 10%. If you look at hypertension alone, it's only 10%. So you can see here, we have population that has a lot of chronic, comorbid conditions. So if we are going to make everyone wear masks, why aren't we incentivizing, at least, not making maybe rules, but incentivizing health? And so fitness centers, yoga studios, these are essential businesses. I mean, this is the data clearly shows this. And so this was another interesting finding here, this particular chart, showing the percentage of hospitalizations based upon comorbidity. And if you look here, and they also go on to study the authors here, and this is the American Heart Association. This isn't some, woo-woo QAnon journal. I mean, this is some, arguably one of the more reputable peer-reviewed journal. They go on to look at, of all the different comorbid conditions linked together, it's basically 2 in 3. 2 out of every 3 infections, individuals had one or all of these conditions, which was high blood pressure, diabetes, or obesity. And again, so it goes on to show, gyms, fitness studios, and why did we close parks and stuff like that, prevent kids from playing sports, all of these things, friends. So again, we may not continue to talk about this, and this might be one of the last conversations that we have about this, but as new data comes out, I want to share it with you because at least like in my neighborhood Facebook groups, there was I was part of this Kirkland Be Neighborly Facebook group, and there was a lot of people that said, hey, there's no correlation here. There's no data to show that your diet matters and you should be eating healthy food and doing that sort of stuff. When of course, it was pretty obvious to me, at least, some of the data coming from Wuhan at that time, and then also Italy and then New York. I mean, so by mid-April, it was pretty clear that not everyone had the same susceptibility to having, ending up on a ventilator and all that sort of stuff. So let's get into some time-restricted feeding things and some aspects about the ketogenic diet and also lipid levels. But first, I do want to let you guys know, so we did recently launch a product, and I've received a lot of questions on this. This is our new high concentrated D3 Absorb. So this is delivered in an organic extra virgin olive oil capsule. So a lot of people were like, well, hey, Mike, do I take vitamin K and D together? I thought you've been promoting that, and I still do stand behind that. That's our essential fatty nutrients formula. But why do you have a standalone high-dose vitamin D? This was for dosing flexibility. So people that live in northern latitudes, even though the days are getting a little bit longer, again, the zenith angle of the sun is not that totally sufficient yet, especially if you're like me, if you live north. I live in Seattle, or if you live in Boston or Minnesota, things like that. It's really not till like late April, May that we start to get the angle of the sun is such that we can synthesize cutaneous vitamin D. So the new D3 Absorb, it's been pretty popular amongst our customers, and I wanted to let you know that you can save over on our website if you want to continue to replenish your body's vitamin D levels until summer starts to really kick in and spring kicks in. So you can go to myosciencewithanx.com. That's MYOXCIENCE.com and use the coupon code podcast to save. So again, as your daily driver, a D3 with K2 is great, but this offers you a little bit more dosing flexibility. You can take more before bed, for example. That's been shown to help some people with their sleep and so on. So let's get into this study. This was an interesting study. So the title of this, if you're just listening, is A Ketogenic Low Carbohydrate High Fat Diet. I gotta scoot in. Increases LDL cholesterol in healthy, young, normal weight women. A randomized controlled feeding trial. So again, we know that the macronutrient composition of your diet is going to influence various lipoproteins, in your plasma, in your serum, in your blood, and all that sort of thing. And so if you start eating more fats and you reduce the carbohydrate content of your diet, then your LDL cholesterol will increase. Now, some doctors are going to freak out. Now, what's interesting about this study, and then we're going to talk about some things that I just a few tips here. I don't want to say that this is totally benign, but also how concerning really is this? Because what you're seeing here is a reduction in insulin, you're seeing a reduction in glucose, and you're seeing a reduction in triglycerides. So again, these are all diseases sort of occur in this cluster. And if we go back to this iceberg analogy, right? We have sleep issues, we have metabolic issues, we have insulin resistance, we have inflammation. So it's not just like one thing that is predisposing people to getting cardiovascular disease or cancer or even having severe outcomes with COVID-19. It's pleiotropic, there's multi-factors. And so it's interesting what you see in the mainstream peer-reviewed medical literature is anytime there's a dietary approach that changes lipid levels, you see, the researchers are predictably sort of thrown off guard and say, this really needs to be monitored and all this sort of stuff. But there's a lot more nuance here, and I want to just kind of give you a little analogy that I've been sort of thinking about. And if we look at, say, fatty muscle, so if you were to look at the muscle of, say, an insulin-resistant overweight individual versus an endurance athlete, someone that's, maybe run marathons or in the Tour de France, or even just like a really strong powerlifting type person, you might look and say both these muscles are sort of fatty. Like, what's going on? Because there's so-called intramyocellular, so within the muscle, intramyocellular lipid deposition. So the natural tendency is to think, well, all fat is bad, right? But then if you this study actually looked at this, parsed out this phenotype of the different types of fatty acids found within muscle to help to sort of characterize and sort of differentiate what makes fatty muscle favorable in an athlete, but unfavorable in, say, insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. And they went on to really kind of do some more, this is not like analysis that you could get at LabCorp or Quest, but went on to sort of figure out that it's not just the type, it's not just overall fat, it's the specific types of fatty acids and where they're found within the cell membrane or the nucleus or different parts of the cell. So it gets really nuanced. So keep that in mind. You have fatty muscle, right? But one is favorable, one is not. Okay, so the one that's not favorable is the insulin-resistant induced fatty muscle from diabetes. Now let's go back to the LDL analogies, right? Where you have this biomarker that is increasing, right? And you have young, healthy people with a reduction in all their cardiometabolic risk factors, but then this one biomarker increases. So, that's just one thing out of all the, liver enzymes went down, glucose went down, insulin went down, triglycerides went down, all these things went down, but then LDL went up. So, should we be totally freaked out about this and super concerned? And so this is actually what this article kind of goes on to sort of dive into and look at what was cool about this article is they actually looked at LDL subclasses. So looked at small dense LDL versus large buoyant LDL and sort of broke this out. They looked at apolipoprotein B, apolipoprotein A1, which are different fatty proteinaceous tags, so to speak, on lipoproteins. And it's sort of interesting. So the atherogenicity, so to speak, so the propensity of the lipid profile to induce cardiovascular damage wasn't as noticeable after this, even though the levels went up. So I just want you to keep that in mind and maybe save this paper. And this is one of many papers that we've actually reviewed on this podcast to show that, in absence of the constellation of cardiometabolic biomarkers, just a small increase in LDL on a low carb high fat diet may not be all that concerning. So, it takes a long time for the medical paradigm to sort of shift, but, I think you're starting to see that. Now, for some of you know this, some of you don't, but I used to sell this technology to doctors in advanced lipoprotein particle testing technology, that is. And so what you're seeing on the screen here is you're seeing chylomicrons and LDL particles. And I want to just make sure that we're all on the same page with this. So, you eat a low carb, high fat diet or a high carb, high fat diet, whatever. You eat dietary fats. So those are put into intestinal chylomicrons, and then they're kind of packaged within the liver and sent out to the periphery and all of these sort of things. Well, these spherical-like structures, these lipoprotein particles, this image actually tells the story a little bit better. If you look at the liver, as we're all looking now here on the screen, you look at the liver and you see this lipoprotein particle, the VLDL. And then you see all of those little blue triglycerides, and then below that you see the cholesterol esters, okay? So what you need to understand is your lipoprotein particles they don't only contain cholesterol, they also contain triglycerides. And so what happens oftentimes is when individuals pivot from a high carb diet or they're insulin resistant and they go in a low carb diet and they start exercising and implement therapeutic lifestyle change, what happens is the composition within the LDL particles changes. So I think it's important that we really sort of understand this. So within the particle, the LDL particle or the VLDL particle or the IDL particle or even the HDL particle, the stuff that the particle is carrying can actually pivot based upon your metabolic health. And so what you start to see here is people's LDL can increase on a low-carb ketogenic diet simply because they're not shuttling around as much triglycerides as they were before, because after embarking on the diet, they become more insulin sensitive. So I want to pause and make sure that kind of makes sense, because this is a very common feature, especially early on when people switch diets. Now, then you have to say, well, although theoretically these lipoprotein particles are atherogenic, if we're reducing the inflammation, improving the body's insulin sensitivity, just because we have more sort of trucks on the road, does that mean that we're causing this atherosclerosis or this damage to the cardiovascular system? So I think this visual, and actually this visual is from a consensus paper from the Journal of the Circulation. Sorry, I don't have this in the notes, but I will go back and put this in there. So the title of this paper is Triglycerides and Cardiovascular Disease, a Scientific Statement from the American Heart Association. So you can find this right online, but it's a great visual to sort of explain what's going on in terms of these lipoprotein particles and, their their composition and things like that. So hopefully that sort of makes sense. But again, I do see and hear this question come up a lot from my clients. People like you are probably concerned about this, and there's certainly more nuance to the story. And on Thursday's podcast, we're going to dive a little bit more into the fatty muscle conversation and talk about what sort of makes insulin sensitive athletic skeletal muscle, although it is characterized by an increased deposition of fats known as intramyocellular lipids. What makes that sort of different on a phenotypic sort of basis compared to insulin-resistant skeletal muscle from obese, overweight individuals? So, okay, that's it for today's show, friends, but let's get to some of your live questions. Let me get back to the screen here. First of all, friends, if you're here and you're enjoying this, please hit that like button. That lets me know that we should do more stuff about this. Now, I just have to ask, for those of you that are here, are you getting bored about hearing about the characteristics of severe outcomes with the coronavirus and obesity and cardiometabolic risk factors, or should we continue to talk about that or no? Just let me know. If you're like, dude, this is boring, let me know. What do y'all think? Let's see here. Okay. In the chat, we have some arguing going on. Thanks for the super chat there, Christy Johnson. Appreciate that. I'm sorry, it's Tessabika. Tessabika, thank you for that. All right. Okay? So people are saying it's not boring. You like it. Okay, cool. Yeah, I was just curious on that, like what y'all think. Kyla says, I read over the case studies from nurses that have taken our employees off work for COVID. One of the first things the nurses mention is employees' high BMI. Yeah. It's interesting. Okay. Jinx says, you have processed sugar addiction. It takes time to purge your body of those foods. Yeah, gosh, the palate is really unique. So I suggest, if you have an addiction to food, or junk food or alcohol or anything like that, one of the easiest, I think it's a revealing way to get a better understanding about your sort of psychological addiction to some of those different foods and things like that, is to go on a vacation or just go out of town, go 2 hours away in an Airbnb. And then come back and then see what your habits are. You'll notice when you're in your same environment, you make the same food choices, you go to the same restaurants, you buy the same foods from your local grocery store. So it's a great way to pattern interrupt. So if you go out of town and then you come back, and then you can make notes of that and say, oh my gosh, I caught myself going to this grocery store and wanting to buy these same cookies or the same chocolate bar or the whatever, wine, whiskey, and you sort of make note of that. And then you can realize like I've been habitually buying this, not because it's good for me or healthy, but just because I was doing it out of habit. So that's kind of a unique thing that I used to travel for work a lot. And it was a great way to sort of reset. and I would come back. And once I was in the house, I would do these things based upon habitual behavior, not because I was hungry or thirsty. And I'd go to the fridge and just start looking for something. And it reminded me that, gosh, I got to break that habit. So, yeah, you might want to try that going out of town or something like that. Okay. Ruth says, can you say more on improving cardiovascular system? Yeah. So one of the best things I think for the cardiovascular system is exercise. Obviously, how you breathe, breathing through your nose is really important. Slowing down the cadence of your breath, doing diaphragmatic breathing, slowing down the exhale. We know that how you breathe affects how you sleep. It affects how you move. And so that is very important. I just interviewed this morning Patrick McEwen, and we talked all about breath. So look forward to that podcast. But how you move and regular movement. So I think, splitting up your exercise, so doing some walks in the morning, doing some walks after dinner. And it's funny, a future of cardiovascular disease that a lot of people don't recognize is the importance of your circadian clock system. So we know that predictably heart attacks tend to occur, from a time standpoint, more prevalent in the winter and in the mornings. People wake up and they have a tight chest and they get a heart attack. So we know that their circadian clock system is really important. So go to bed at the same time, get up at the same time. That's one thing. The sauna, I'm a huge fan of the sauna, and I know not everyone has access to a sauna, but start saving. I was thinking about this. If you could save $300 a month, in 18 months, you could have the best sauna of your dreams. So just start piling away some money in a money market account. When you get your paycheck, just throw $300 in there or throw $150, whatever you can. So you don't see it, you can't touch it. And then once you have enough money, you can invest in a sauna. I truly believe that this is one of the most under-recognized futures of improving all different facets of health, namely because you can get better sleep, and then better sleep leads to better recovery, less inflammation. But I think the sauna is really, really, really important. So thanks for asking that question. Richard says, Mike, do you have a tumor and is it gone now with keto? No, you know what? That's a great question. I have a video coming on about this. So as many of you know, I like labs and things like that. And when I was getting into gardening, giving you the details in the backstory, not that you really care, but it'll explain the question and help answer a little bit better. We have a lot of garden space, about 400 square feet of garden space in our backyard. And we were having these monster salads, dehydrated stuff, and having a lot of vegetables. And during that time frame, I started to notice like some weird sort of GI issues at night. Like I felt like this sort of lump and so forth. Really probably just undigested vegetable matter and things like that. So the next time I did my labs, I ran like all these tumor biomarker related metabolites. So CA125, CA19. So CA is like a cancer antigen. So these are available at Quest or LabCorp. I was just being like, it was irresponsible of me to do this. And this is a lesson my mentor, Gerard Guillory. So if Gerard, you're listening, I want to thank you. He's an internal medicine doctor who took me under his wing back in 2006, 2007 range. And so one of the other biomarkers because I was like, I'm just going to look at every tumor biomarker, which is totally stupid. I'll tell you why in a minute. And I looked at alpha-fetoprotein. AFP. So AFP is normally only run in individuals who have hepatitis, who have hepatocellular carcinoma, who have been diagnosed with testicular cancer to monitor this. And the range is 0 to like 30,000. Like if you have stage 4 testicular cancer, or you've had very advanced hepatocellular carcinoma, which is a metastatic cancer of the liver, then your AFP, alpha-fetoprotein, will be off the charts high. Mine, the range is from 0 to 10. Mine was 70. So I kind of freaked out, and then I was like, oh my gosh. And then I did retest. It's always been at that. It's never gone up. It's never gone down. It's like, it's always at 67 or something like that. And, I let that go on for like 2 years. I just retest it and felt fine. Looked at my liver enzymes. They haven't increased. And then I went up and got this full body MRI. And I remember thinking, on that trip, this is where I'm going to have this reveal, this hidden cancer and all this sort of stuff. And my liver is squeaky clean. The only thing that we found on the MRI was I had congested sinuses, and I learned some great ways to unblock those. But the point of me going into this long story is having an elevated biomarker and me not knowing what to do with it created a lot of mental stress. So I discourage you from running a lot of blood tests for which you don't know what to do with. If it's not going to change your intervention, your treatment, your outcome, how you approach your disease management, please don't run the test. Now, for some of you, and I ran into this too, more is better, right? More testing is better. How could it possibly be detrimental to do more? You can create confusion and chaos. So I'm a fan of doing a comprehensive every year CBC with Chem24 and differential, looking at all your liver enzymes, your iron, your ferritin, your thyroid, your DHA, all of that. But when you start getting too complicated and looking at tumor biomarkers, this is where you might need to then do imaging, and imaging has side effects, especially CT scans and other things. So I just want you to be aware of that. So great question. Fiona says, hi there from New Zealand. Not boring. Some of us need ongoing reminders of why to make good health choices. Yes. Okay. So Fiona, thank you for that. Kathy says, I'm sorry. So Angela, is one of the reasons why most people new to carnivore keto might find exercise difficult or exhausting due to changes in intramuscular fat. So Angela, this is a question. So early on, this is a great question rather. When you're changing your dietary macronutrients from a predominantly high, carbohydrate diet to a ketogenic diet, you might experience some glycogen depletion. There's a lot of sort of transport proteins that are upregulated when you embark on a ketogenic diet. These so-called MCTs, these monocarboxylate transport proteins, because these ketones are basically they're like a time-released fat. That's the way that I kind of think about this mentally. So you take these free fatty acids found from breaking down the stuff that you eat, like the avocados, or the free fatty acids from your fat in your muscle. You split those up into acetoacetate and so forth, and those get converted into beta-hydroxybutyrate, and those get transported around the body, and that the BHB and acetoacetate need to get those little acetyl-CoA, you need to get those acetyl-CoA molecules somehow. And so the acetoacetate and BHB help do that, but they need to get inside the cells and the tissues. And so there's sort of this lag of this period where your body's not used to necessitating or needing these ketones. And so that's where I think some people can run into some issues. But Angela, I think it's a good question. That was a complicated way of explaining the physiology. If you want to, Peter Attia and I did a podcast on this a few months, it was about a couple of years ago now, actually. And I would definitely think about reviewing that, because we did talk about the fact that these transport proteins are inducible, and you might be able to get some new information about that. But I would give it 4 to 6 weeks with exercise, and you might feel a little bit heavy, a little tired at first, but you can definitely adapt over time. Okay. What else? Wim Hof method. Yes. So Wim Hof can be amazing. Fasting is a very rewarding practice as well, as you said, Jesus freak. Thank you for that. So yeah. All right. Did you bother trying to remove? Okay. So there's a lot of other questions here. So friends, as always, I'm grateful that you're here. Was this helpful? Let me know by hitting the like button. Thanks for leaving the comments there and so forth. And have a great afternoon. Have a great evening. Get out there, get walking. If you found this helpful, you can share this with a friend or family member to let them know that there actually is data showing that we shouldn't be hitting up Chick-fil-A and McDonald's even when there is respiratory viruses circulating. So we'll catch you all in a future episode down the road. Until then, be well. Bye.